Inside the velvet curtains of the Gilded Fork, Manhattan's most elite sanctuary, the walls aren't what you should fear. It's the invisible staff. One Friday night, a struggling waitress named Melanie Linley stood with a pitcher of ice water in one hand and the survival of $1 billion empire in the other. As she served the city's most eligible bachelor, Ethan Caldwell, and his supermodel fiancée, she realized she held a secret lethal enough to burn their perfect wedding to the ground. Faced with a choice to protect her job or expose a lie, Melanie chose the truth, igniting a scandal that quickly escalated into an all-out war. The lunch rush at the Gilded Fork was a choreographed chaos of clinking silver, hushed gossip, and the scent of truffle oil masking the smell of desperate ambition. Melanie Linley wiped a smudge from the mahogany railing of table 4, her feet throbbing in the cheap, black, non-slip shoes that were 2 sizes too narrow. She had been invisible for 3 years. That was the job description. To the clientele who frequented the establishment on East 61st Street, Melanie wasn't a 24-year-old with a crippling student loan debt and a sick mother in Queens. She was a pair of hands that delivered Wagyu beef and refilled sparkling water. More Pellegrino. Now! The voice was sharp, nasal, and entirely uninterested in a response. Melanie turned, forcing the practiced neutral smile onto her face. At the best table in the house, the corner booth shielded by velvet curtains, sat Vanessa Gentry. Vanessa was the kind of woman who looked like she had been airbrushed at birth. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that probably cost more than Melanie's rent. Opposite her sat a man who was definitely not her fiancé. Melanie knew this because Vanessa's engagement to Ethan Caldwell, the tech mogul behind the Aura operating system, was currently plastered on every billboard in Times Square. The man at the table was Preston Banks. Melanie recognized him from the business section of the newspaper she read on the subway. He was Ethan's CFO and, according to the tabloids, his best friend since prep school. "Of course, Miss Gentry," Melanie said softly, pouring the water with steady hands. Neither of them looked at her. To them, she was furniture. "He's signing the trust over on Monday," Preston said, his voice low but vibrating with smug satisfaction. He swirled his scotch, ignoring the lunch hour. "Once he signs the IP rights to the holding company for tax purposes, it's over. We trigger the clause in the prenup 6 months after the wedding." Vanessa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "God, he's so pathetic, Preston. He actually thinks I'm learning the piano to surprise him at the reception. I'm spending those lessons at the loft with you." Melanie froze for a fraction of a second. The water bottle hovered over the crystal glass. "Careful," Preston snapped, finally glancing at Melanie with eyes like cold marbles. "Don't hover." "Apologies, sir," Melanie murmured, backing away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just an affair. This was a corporate assassination. Ethan Caldwell wasn't just being cheated on. He was being gutted by the 2 people he trusted most in the world. Melanie retreated to the server station, her hands shaking. "Table 7 needs bread," Gustavo, the floor manager, hissed at her. Gustavo was a man who believed stress was a management style. "And stop daydreaming, Linley. 1 more mistake and you're out." Melanie nodded, grabbing the bread basket. She needed this job. Her mother's dialysis treatments weren't fully covered by insurance, and the tips at the Gilded Fork were the only thing keeping the lights on. If she spoke up, she'd be fired. Who would believe a waitress over a socialite and a CFO? But as the hours ground on, the conversation she overheard festered in her stomach. That evening, the dinner shift began. The atmosphere shifted from business aggressive to romantic luxury. At 8:30 p.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. Ethan Caldwell walked in. He looked different in person than he did in magazines. In print, he looked untouchable. In person, under the warm, ambient lighting of the restaurant, he looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes, and he loosened his tie as if it were a noose. Holding his arm, beaming like a radiant angel of deception, was Vanessa. They were seated at table 4, the same table where Vanessa had plotted his ruin 6 hours earlier. "Melanie, you're on 4, Gustavo commanded. "VIP protocol. Mr. Caldwell likes the Pinot Noir breathed for exactly 10 minutes. Melanie walked toward the table, her stomach in knots. As she approached, she saw Ethan reach across the table to take Vanessa's hand. He looked at her with such open, unguarded adoration, it made Melanie's chest ache. "I'm just glad we finally have a night off," Ethan said, his voice deep and weary. "Preston has been riding me hard about these new contracts. I feel like I'm drowning in paperwork." "It's for our future, darling," Vanessa cooed, stroking his thumb. "Preston just wants what's best for the company. You should trust him." Melanie uncorked the wine, the sound loud in her ears. She poured a splash for Ethan to taste. "Excellent," he nodded, not looking at her. Melanie poured Vanessa's glass. As she leaned in, she caught the scent of Vanessa's perfume, Chanel No. 5, and beneath it, the faint, musky cologne that Preston had been wearing at lunch. "Do it!" a voice screamed in Melanie's head. "He's going to lose everything on Monday." Melanie finished pouring. She placed the bottle in the ice bucket. She took a breath. "Is there anything else?" Ethan asked, finally glancing up at her. He had kind eyes, hazel and flecked with green. Melanie looked at Vanessa. Vanessa was checking her reflection in a spoon, completely unbothered. "Sir," Melanie started, her voice trembling slightly. I hope you enjoy the evening." Coward, she thought. She turned to leave. "Wait," Ethan said. He frowned. "You look familiar. Have you served us before?" "Yes, sir," Melanie said. She looked at Vanessa. "I served Miss Gentry lunch here today." The air left the table. Vanessa's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits of pure venom. "I wasn't here for lunch," Vanessa said, her laugh high and brittle. "I was at the spa. You must be mistaken." "No, Miss Gentry," Melanie said, and suddenly the fear was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. She looked directly at Ethan. "She was here, at this table, with Mr. Banks." Ethan went still. "Preston. You were having lunch with Preston?" "She's lying," Vanessa hissed, her voice rising. "Ethan, this girl is obviously fishing for attention. Look at her shoes. She's probably high." "I'm not high," Melanie said, her voice gaining strength. She gripped her serving tray like a shield. They were discussing the IP rights transfer on Monday, and the loft, and how the piano lessons are a cover. The silence that followed was absolute. The clatter of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Ethan slowly pulled his hand away from Vanessa's. "The IP rights," Ethan whispered. "I only discussed the draft of that with Preston this morning. No one else knows." He looked at Vanessa. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her pale and patchy beneath the makeup. "Ethan, baby, she's crazy," Vanessa stammered, grabbing his arm. "She's a nobody. Are you going to take the word of a servant over your future wife?" "She knows about the IP," Ethan said, his voice hardening into steel. "And the piano lessons." "Get the manager," Vanessa shrieked, standing up and knocking over her wine glass. Red liquid soaked the white tablecloth like a blood stain. "I want this bitch fired. I want her arrested." Gustavo materialized instantly, looking terrified. "Mr. Caldwell, Miss Gentry, I am so sorry. What has she done?" "She's lying about me," Vanessa screamed, pointing a manicured finger at Melanie. "She's been harassing us all night." Ethan stood up. He was tall, looming over the table. He looked from Vanessa, whose face was twisted in ugly rage, to Melanie, who stood straight-backed, accepting her fate. "Did you say those things?" Ethan asked Melanie quietly. "Yes," Melanie said, "because it's the truth. They are planning to trigger a prenup clause 6 months after the wedding. They called you pathetic." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were cold. "Gustavo," Vanessa barked, "fire her. Now. Or Ethan pulls his investment from this dump." Gustavo turned to Melanie, his face purple. "Get out! You're done! Get your things and get out of my restaurant!" "Ethan!" Vanessa turned to him, tears instantly flowing. "Please, tell him to throw her out. She ruined our night." Ethan looked at Melanie. For a second, Melanie thought he might save her. He might thank her. Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, and placed it on the table. "I'm leaving," Ethan said flatly. "With me?" Vanessa asked, reaching for him. "No," Ethan said. He walked away, leaving Vanessa standing amidst the spilled wine. He didn't look back at Melanie. "You heard him." Gustavo grabbed Melanie's arm roughly. "Get out, and don't expect your last paycheck." Melanie pulled her arm free. She looked at Vanessa, who was now glaring at her with hatred pure enough to burn. "You'll regret this," Vanessa hissed. "I will make sure you never work in this city again." Melanie untied her apron, dropped it on the wine-stained table, and walked out the back door into the cold New York rain. She had done the right thing. So why did it feel like her life was over? The rain in New York doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. Melanie sat on the edge of her bed in her cramped apartment in Queens, staring at her phone. It had been 3 days since the incident at the Gilded Fork. She had applied to 5 restaurants since Saturday morning. 3 of them had called her back within an hour to cancel the interview. Blacklisted. Vanessa Gentry wasn't just a socialite. Her father was a media tycoon. Her reach was long, and her pettiness was infinite. Melanie checked her bank account balance. $412.50. Rent was due in a week, $200, and her mother's pharmacy bill was sitting on the kitchen counter, $180. "Melanie?" Her mother's voice was raspy from the other room. "Coming, Ma," Melanie called out, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. She walked into the small living room where her mother, Sarah, sat wrapped in blankets, watching the news. "You're home early again," Sarah said, eyeing her daughter shrewdly. "Restaurant slow?" "Yeah, dead slow," Melanie lied. She hadn't told her mother she was fired. The stress would spike her blood pressure. "Look at this," Sarah pointed at the TV. On the screen, a breaking news banner flashed. "Caldwell Gentry wedding postponed?" Melanie's breath hitched. The footage showed paparazzi swarming Ethan Caldwell as he exited his office building. He looked worse than he had at the restaurant. He was unshaven, wearing sunglasses, and surrounded by security. A reporter thrust a microphone in his face. "Mr. Caldwell, is it true that Preston Banks has been terminated as CFO?" Ethan ignored them, diving into a waiting black SUV. Melanie felt a grim sense of satisfaction. He believed me, but satisfaction didn't pay the bills. Across the city, in the penthouse of the Millennium Tower, Ethan Caldwell was staring at a wall of monitors. His apartment was cold, modern, and currently felt like a fortress. "We found the emails," a man in a grey suit said. This was Arthur Penhaligon, Ethan's private investigator. "You were right. Preston and Vanessa have been communicating via a draft folder in a shared dummy account for 6 months. Ethan swiped a hand down his face. "And the IP transfer?" It was set to route the patent ownership to a shell company in the Caymans owned by Vanessa's father, but managed by Preston, Arthur confirmed. If you had signed those papers on Monday, they would have owned Aura OS within a year. Ethan picked up a crystal tumbler of whiskey and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, amber liquid dripping down the expensive plaster. My best friend, Ethan muttered. And the woman I was going to marry. He had spent the last 48 hours dismantling his life. He had fired Preston, locked him out of the servers, and served Vanessa with a restraining order. The legal fallout would be immense. The board of directors was in a panic. The stock price was wobbling. But amidst the chaos, one image kept flashing in his mind. The waitress, the girl with the dark, intelligent eyes, and the trembling hands who had stood before the firing squad and told the truth. "Arthur," Ethan said, turning away from the screens. "Yes, sir?" "The waitress, from the Gilded Fork. The one who tipped you off?" "Yes. I need to know who she is. I left her there. Gustavo, that manager is a sycophant. He probably fired her the second I walked out." Arthur tapped on his tablet. "I can find her. Do you have a name?" "No," Ethan realized with a jolt of shame. "I didn't even look at her name tag." "I'll pull the employment records from the restaurant. It shouldn't take long." "Find her," Ethan said. "She saved my company. I owe her." It took Arthur 2 days to find her. By then, Melanie's situation had gone from desperate to critical. She was standing behind the counter of a dingy diner in the Bronx called Sal's Bucket. The uniform was a grease-stained yellow polo shirt, and the clientele was mostly truck drivers who thought slapping her rear end was a valid form of tipping. "Hey, sweetheart, coffee's cold," a burly man grunted, sliding his mug toward her. "I'll brew a fresh pot," Melanie said, her voice dull. She was exhausted. She was working double shifts here just to make half of what she made at the Gilded Fork. The bell above the diner door jingled. The chatter in the diner didn't stop, but the atmosphere changed. It was like a wolf walking into a sheep pen. 2 men in immaculate suits walked in. One was older, with grey hair, Arthur. The other was younger, wearing a tailored navy coat and sunglasses. Ethan Caldwell took off his glasses as he scanned the room. His eyes landed on Melanie. Melanie froze, the coffee pot suspended in midair. Ethan walked straight to the counter, ignoring the stares of the truck drivers. He looked at the grease stains on her shirt, the dark circles under her eyes, and the cheap diner surroundings. "Melanie Linley," Ethan said. "Mr. Caldwell," Melanie replied, clutching the coffee pot like a weapon. "If you're here to complain about the service, you'll have to wait in line." Ethan almost smiled. It was a ghost of a smile, but it was there. "I'm not here for the coffee." "Why are you here?" "To apologize," Ethan said. The diner went silent. People were listening now. "And to offer you a job," Melanie scoffed. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Caldwell. Unless you're opening a taco stand in your penthouse, I don't think I'm qualified for whatever you need." "I don't need a waitress," Ethan said, leaning in. His voice dropped, intimate and urgent. "I need a wife." The truck driver at the end of the counter choked on his donut. Melanie stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Not a real wife," Ethan clarified quickly, realizing how crazy he sounded. "I need an arrangement. Vanessa is spinning the narrative. She's telling the press I'm unstable, that I imagined the affair, that I'm mentally unfit to run my company. The stock is tanking. I need to show the world I'm stable, happy, and moving on." "So you want to hire me to play a role?" Melanie asked, her eyebrows shooting up. "I need someone I can trust," Ethan said, his eyes intense. "And you are the only person in this city who told me the truth when it cost you everything. I know you were fired. I know you're blacklisted. I know about your mother's medical bills." Melanie stiffened. "You checked up on me." "I had to," Ethan said. I'm offering you a contract. 1 year. We get married. We play the part. We fix my reputation. In exchange, I pay off your mother's medical debts. I buy you a house. And I give you $5 million when the divorce is finalized. $5 million. Melanie looked around the greasy diner. She looked at Sal, her new boss, who was currently picking his nose in the back. She thought of her mother, who was skipping pills to save money. And if I say no, Melanie asked. Then I walk out that door and you keep pouring coffee, Ethan said. But I think you're made for more than this. Melanie. Melanie set the coffee pot down. She untied the ugly yellow apron. 1 year? She asked. 1 year, Ethan promised. Strictly business. Melanie looked him in the eye. You better have a good lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, because I'm going to need that in writing. Ethan grinned, and for the first time, he looked like the billionaire on the magazine covers. I have the best lawyers in the city. Let's go. The transition from Melanie Linley, unemployed waitress, to Melanie Caldwell, billionaire fiancée, was less like a Cinderella story and more like a military boot camp. Ethan moved her into the penthouse that night. It was awkward. The place was massive, glass and steel, with a view of Central Park that cost more than the GDP of a small country. The guest wing is yours, Ethan said, gesturing to a corridor. Arthur has already arranged for your mother to be transferred to Mount Sinai Private Care. The best specialists in the country are reviewing her case as we speak. Melanie felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. That's all I cared about. It's part of the deal, Ethan said stiffly. He was back in business mode. Tomorrow, the styling team arrives at 6:00 a.m. We have a press conference at noon. We are announcing the engagement. Wait, tomorrow? Melanie panicked. Ethan, people aren't stupid. You just broke up with Vanessa 3 days ago. Exactly, Ethan said, pacing the living room. The narrative is that I realized Vanessa wasn't the one because I had already fallen for someone else. Someone real. Someone who grounded me. Me? Melanie pointed to herself. I served you steak. It's a romantic trope, Ethan said, shrugging. The prince and the pauper. The public eats it up. It distracts them from the corporate financials. The next morning was a blur of brushes, hairspray, and tailors. A team of 3 women plucked, polished, and painted Melanie until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She was wearing a cream-colored dress by Dior that fit her like a second skin. Her dark curls were tamed into elegant waves. You clean up well, a voice said. Melanie turned. Ethan was standing in the doorway. He was wearing a charcoal suit, and he looked devastatingly handsome, but his eyes were guarded. Ready to lie to the world? Melanie asked, smoothing her dress. It's not a lie if we make them believe it, Ethan said. He held out a velvet box. Inside sat a diamond the size of a quail egg. Put it on. Melanie slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy. Showtime, Ethan said, offering his arm. The press conference was held in the lobby of Caldwell Industries. The flashbulbs were blinding. Hundreds of reporters shouted questions at once. Mr. Caldwell, is it true about the embezzlement? Who is the mystery woman? Is Vanessa Gentry suing you? Ethan raised a hand, silencing the room. He pulled Melanie closer to his side. His hand on her waist felt hot, burning through the fabric of her dress. Thank you all for coming, Ethan said, his voice steady. The rumors regarding my former relationship are true. That chapter is closed. However, I am not here to dwell on the past. I am here to introduce you to my future. He looked at Melanie. He smiled, and it looked so genuine that Melanie almost forgot he was paying her to do it. This is Melanie, Ethan said. She's the one who saved me, in more ways than one. The reporters went wild. "Melanie! Melanie! Look here!" "How did you meet?" Melanie stepped up to the microphone. She remembered the script Ethan's PR team had given her. "Keep it vague. Be humble. Look adoring." "We met. Quietly," Melanie said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Ethan isn't the man you see in the tabloids. He's kind and honest, and that's what I fell in love with." She looked up at Ethan. For a moment, amidst the flashing lights, they locked eyes. "He really is kind," she thought. "He saved my mum." "She's natural," Ethan thought. "She's not afraid." "Kiss him," a reporter shouted from the back. The crowd took up the chant. "Kiss, kiss, kiss." Ethan looked at Melanie, a silent question in his eyes. "Is this okay?" Melanie nodded imperceptibly. "It's the job." Ethan leaned down. Melanie tipped her head back. His lips brushed hers. It was supposed to be a show. It was supposed to be dry and quick. But when their lips met, something sparked. It wasn't the cold transaction of a business deal. It was warm and soft and electric. Ethan's hand tightened on her waist. Melanie's hand instinctively came up to rest on his chest. The kiss lingered a second too long to be just for the cameras. When they pulled apart, Ethan looked dazed. Melanie felt breathless. The cameras flashed like lightning. High above the city, in a luxury apartment littered with empty champagne bottles, Vanessa Gentry watched the live feed on her phone. She hurled the device across the room, smashing a vase. "That little waitress rat!" Vanessa screamed. Preston Banks sat on the sofa, looking grim. The stock jumped 4% since the press conference started. The public loves her. They're calling her the American dream. "She ruined everything," Vanessa paced, her nails digging into her palms. "She humiliated me. I am not going to let her win, Preston. I'm going to destroy her." "How?" Preston asked. "Ethan has her protected." Vanessa smiled, and it was a terrifying sight. "Everyone has skeletons, Preston. A girl like that? From Queens? She has dirt. We just need to dig it up. And when we find it, we're going to bury her with it." The Caldwell Foundation Charity Gala was the event of the season. It was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically in the Temple of Dendor room. The ancient Egyptian sandstone glowed under amber uplights, surrounded by a moat of water that reflected the faces of New York's elite. Melanie stood in front of a full-length mirror in the penthouse, barely breathing. She was wearing a gown of emerald green silk that pooled around her feet like liquid money. It was backless, daring, and terrified her. "You look like a queen," Sarah said softly. Melanie had arranged for her mother to visit the penthouse for a few hours before the doctors at Mount Sinai began her new treatment protocol. Sarah sat in a wheelchair, looking frail but her eyes bright. "I feel like an imposter, Ma," Melanie whispered, touching the diamond necklace Ethan had clasped around her neck an hour ago. "These people, they eat girls like me for breakfast. They speak a language I don't know." "You speak the language of survival, Melanie," Sarah said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You worked double shifts on a sprained ankle. You dealt with landlords who tried to evict us for being 2 days late. A room full of rich people drinking champagne. That's easy. Just remember, they bleed the same as us." Ethan appeared in the doorway. He stopped dead. He had seen Melanie in the Waitress uniform. He had seen her in the press conference dress. But this was different. She didn't look like a role he had cast. She looked like the only real thing in his life. "Ready?" Ethan asked, his voice rougher than intended. "As I'll ever be," Melanie said. She kissed her mother goodbye and took Ethan's arm. The car ride was silent. Ethan was typing furiously on his phone. "Is everything okay?" Melanie asked. "Vanessa is going to be there," Ethan said without looking up. She bought a table through a shell corporation. She's coming to rattle you. Let her come, Melanie said. Ethan looked at her, surprised. You aren't scared? Ethan, I've faced down drunk truck drivers at 2:00 a.m. who didn't want to pay for their pancakes. Vanessa Gentry is just a bully with a trust fund. Ethan smiled. It was a real smile, reaching his eyes. He put his phone away and took her hand. Stay close to me. If it gets too much, squeeze my hand twice, and we leave. I don't care who is watching. When they walked into the museum, the hush was immediate. Then came the whispers. Flashbulbs popped from the press pen near the entrance. Melanie kept her chin high, mimicking the posture she had seen Vanessa use, but softening it with a genuine warmth she directed at the people they passed. They moved through the crowd, shaking hands with senators, tech rivals, and old money matriarchs. Melanie charmed them. She didn't pretend to be an heiress. When the wife of a bank CEO asked where she summered, Melanie smiled and said, Usually working, Mrs. Vanderwall. I believe hard work is good for the soul. The woman had beamed, calling her refreshingly grounded. Then the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder. Vanessa Gentry approached. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was made of broken mirrors, silver, sharp, and blinding. On her arm was Preston, who looked like a man walking to the gallows but trying to look dignified about it. Ethan, Vanessa purred, blocking their path, and the help. The circle of socialites around them went deadly silent. Ethan tightened his grip on Melanie's waist. Vanessa, you're trespassing. I suggest you leave before security escorts you out. Oh, don't be so dramatic, darling, Vanessa laughed, sipping her champagne. She turned her cold eyes to Melanie. I just wanted to welcome your little project to the fold. Tell me, honey, did you have to Google which fork to use before you came here? Or is Ethan feeding you by hand? Melanie felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She felt Ethan tense up, ready to explode. She squeezed his hand once. Stop. She would handle this. Melanie stepped forward, closing the distance between her and Vanessa. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was the woman holding the winning ticket. You know, Vanessa, Melanie said, her voice calm and carrying clearly over the crowd. I might have had to learn which fork to use, but at least I didn't have to learn how to be loyal. That came naturally to me. It's a shame all that money couldn't buy you a conscience. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Someone in the back actually chuckled. Vanessa's face turned a blotchy red. You little gutter rat. And regarding the help, Melanie interrupted, stepping closer so only Vanessa could hear the steel in her voice. I served you water while you plotted to destroy the man you claimed to love. I might have been a servant, but tonight I'm the one on his arm, and you're just the mistake he corrected. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked around and saw the judgment in the eyes of the crowd. She had lost the room. Come on, Preston, Vanessa hissed, spinning on her heel. This party is a bore. As they retreated, Ethan looked down at Melanie with an expression of pure awe. Remind me never to cross you, he whispered. Just don't cheat on me, Melanie teased, the adrenaline making her giddy. I wouldn't dream of it, Ethan said. And in that moment, under the lights of the Temple of Dendor, he realized it wasn't a joke. He was falling in love with his fake fiancée. Later that night, back at the penthouse, the adrenaline crashed. Melanie sat on the sofa, taking off her heels. Ethan poured 2 glasses of whiskey. You were incredible tonight, Ethan said, sitting next to her. The distance between them on the couch was shrinking every day. I was terrified, Melanie admitted. You didn't show it. Ethan handed her the glass. Their fingers brushed, The electricity was back, stronger than at the press conference. Ethan looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips. Melanie. This arrangement. The contract. Yes? Melanie's heart hammered. It's starting to feel less like a contract, Ethan murmured. He leaned in. Melanie held her breath. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted him to erase the memory of every hard shift, every lonely night. But just as their lips were inches apart, Ethan's phone buzzed violently on the coffee table, then again, and again. Ethan pulled back, sighing. He picked up the phone. His face went grey. "What is it?" Melanie asked, the spell broken. Ethan looked up, and the warmth was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by the icy paranoia that Vanessa had instilled in him. Someone just leaked the source code for Aura 2.0 to our biggest competitor in Silicon Valley, Ethan said, his voice hollow. And the digital footprint leads back to this apartment. The morning sun hit the penthouse floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside the temperature was sub-zero. Arthur Penhaligon, the PI, was typing on a laptop at the dining table. Ethan was pacing, his tie undone, looking like he hadn't slept. Melanie stood by the kitchen island, clutching a mug of coffee, feeling like a prisoner. "Trace it again," Ethan commanded. "I have, Ethan," Arthur said, his voice regretful. He didn't look at Melanie. The leak was sent at 3:00 a.m. It was sent from an iPad connected to the guest Wi-Fi. The iPad registered to Melanie Linley. Melanie dropped her mug. It shattered on the marble floor. "That's impossible," she said, her voice shaking. "I was asleep. I don't even know what source code looks like. I used that iPad to watch Netflix and FaceTime my mum." Ethan stopped pacing. He turned to her. The look in his eyes broke her heart. It wasn't anger. It was betrayal. It was the look of a man who had convinced himself to trust again, only to be proven right about his cynicism. "Vanessa offered you money, didn't she?" Ethan asked quietly. "What?" Melanie stepped back. "No, Ethan, you know me." "Do I?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "I know you're an actress. You proved that last night. You stood in front of New York and played the perfect partner. How hard would it be to play the innocent girlfriend while selling me out for a bigger payout?" "I didn't do this," Melanie screamed, tears hot in her eyes. "Why would I destroy the only person who has ever helped me?" "Because everyone has a price," Ethan said coldly. "Preston was my brother. Vanessa was my wife-to-be. They sold me for shares. Why wouldn't you sell me for cash?" "Sir," Arthur interrupted gently. The transfer was encrypted, but the login used was definitely Melanie's biometric thumbprint. Melanie looked at her hands. I was sleeping. I take sleeping pills sometimes. Maybe someone came in?" "The security system shows no entries or exits," Ethan said. "Just us. You and me." "So you think I'm a corporate spy?" Melanie asked, her voice trembling with rage now. "You think the waitress from Queens is a master hacker?" "I think you're desperate," Ethan said, "and desperate people do terrible things." He walked over to the counter, pulled a checkbook from his jacket, and scribbled something. He tore it out and slammed it on the counter. "The deal is off," Ethan said. "Here is the money for your mother's treatment for the next year. Take it. And get out." Melanie looked at the check. It was for $200,000. She looked at Ethan. She saw the pain behind his eyes, the walls slamming back up. He was protecting himself the only way he knew how, by cutting out the cancer before it could kill him. Melanie picked up the check. Ethan flinched. He expected her to take it, to prove him right. Melanie ripped the check in half, then in quarters. She threw the confetti of paper at his chest. "I don't want your money," Melanie said, her voice deadly quiet. And I don't want your pity. I told you the truth about Vanessa because it was the right thing to do. I fell in love with you because I thought you were a good man. But you're just a coward, Ethan. You're so scared of being hurt that you're hurting the only person who actually gives a damn about you." She turned to Arthur. "I didn't do it." Arthur looked at her, and for a second, Melanie saw doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe the data fully. But he worked for Ethan. He looked down. Melanie walked to the guest room, packed her single duffel bag in 5 minutes, and walked to the elevator. Ethan stood with his back to her, looking out at the city. He didn't turn around. The elevator doors closed, severing the world between them. 2 days later, Caldwell Industries was in freefall. The stock had plummeted 20% following the leak of the Aura 2.0 code. The board of directors had called an emergency vote of no confidence for Friday. Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by lawyers. He felt numb. He had saved the company from Vanessa's initial attack, only to lose it to Melanie? It still didn't make sense. Why would she tear up the check? If she was in it for the money, why leave empty-handed? His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Caldwell, Miss Gentry is here. She says she wants to help." "Send her away," Ethan said. The door opened anyway. Vanessa walked in, looking somber and modest in a black dress. No sequins today. "Ethan," she said softly, "I heard about the waitress. I told you. These people, they are parasites." "Get out, Vanessa," Ethan said, not looking up. "I know you're hurting," she said, walking around the desk to place a hand on his shoulder. "But Preston and we can fix this. We have contacts at the competitor. We can mitigate the damage. But we need you to drop the lawsuits against us. We need to be a team again." Ethan looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. He saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. And suddenly, the fog cleared. The biometric thumbprint. Ethan remembered the gala. He remembered Vanessa grabbing Melanie's hand to inspect the engagement ring. She had held it for a long time. She had been wearing a large, strange ring on her own finger. A scanner? And Preston. Preston was a tech genius. He knew the Penthouse network better than anyone. He had set it up. "Arthur!" Ethan shouted, startling Vanessa. Arthur ran into the room. "The gala," Ethan said, standing up. "Check the security footage of the gala. The moment Vanessa confronted us. Look at her hands." "Ethan, darling, you're hysterical," Vanessa said, backing away, her smile faltering. "Arthur, check the network logs for a remote access tunnel," Ethan ordered, his mind racing. Preston installed the security. If he had a back door, he could have spoofed the MAC address of Melanie's iPad. He didn't need to be in the apartment. He just needed her biometric data to authenticate the transfer. Arthur's eyes went wide, and Vanessa got the print at the party. Ethan turned to Vanessa. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked like a trapped rat. "You framed her," Ethan growled, advancing on her. "You knew I would believe it because of what you did to me. You used my own trauma against me." "It doesn't matter," Vanessa shrieked. "The board votes tomorrow. Preston has bought enough voting shares during the crash to oust you. You're finished, Ethan." She ran out of the office. Ethan looked at Arthur. "Where is she?" "Vanessa is gone," Arthur said. "No," Ethan said, grabbing his coat. "Where is Melanie?" Melanie was back at Sal's bucket. Sal had let her return, mostly because he was short-staffed, but he made her wear the trainee badge again, as a humiliation. She was wiping down the counter, her eyes red and puffy. Her mum was back in their cramped apartment, the private care cancelled. They were back to square one. Worse than square one, because now Melanie knew what it felt like to be loved, and she had lost it. The door to the diner opened. Melanie didn't look up. "Sit anywhere. Coffee is $2. "I don't want coffee." Melanie froze. She looked up. Ethan stood there. He looked terrible. He was out of breath, his hair wind-blown, his suit rumpled. He looked like he had run all the way from Manhattan. "I'm working, Mr. Caldwell," Melanie said, gripping the rag. "Please leave." "I was wrong," Ethan said. He said it loud. The whole diner heard. "I was an idiot. I was blind. They set you up. Vanessa used a scanner at the gala to steal your print. Preston hacked the system." Melanie stared at him. "You figured it out?" "Yes," Ethan said, walking to the counter. "But not before I broke the heart of the only woman who ever told me the truth." He reached across the counter, ignoring the ketchup stains. He took her hand. "Melanie, I am so sorry. I don't care about the company. I don't care about the money. I just want you back. I can't sleep. I can't breathe. The penthouse is just a box of glass without you." Melanie looked at him. She saw the sincerity. She saw the man she loved. "You fired me," she said softly. "I'm rehiring you," Ethan said. "Not as a fake fiancé, as a partner, as my equal. I need you, Melanie, not to save my image, to save me." "The board meeting is tomorrow," Melanie said, her mind shifting gears. "Vanessa said they're going to oust you." "Let them," Ethan said. "I'll start over. With you." Melanie pulled her hand away and untied her apron. She threw it on the floor. "No," Melanie said, her eyes flashing with fire. "We are not going to let them win. You built that company. It's yours. And if we're going to be partners, we're going to fight." She walked around the counter. "Arthur called me 10 minutes ago. He found the digital trail Preston forgot to erase. We have the proof." Ethan laughed, a sound of pure relief. "You were always smarter than me." "Let's go get your company back," Melanie said. The boardroom of Caldwell Industries was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space of polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling glass, and air conditioning set cold enough to preserve a corpse. Today, it felt less like a meeting room and more like an execution chamber. 12 members of the board sat around the long oval table, their faces unreadable masks of corporate indifference. At the head of the table, where Ethan usually sat, Preston Banks was now perched. He looked entirely too comfortable. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory satisfaction of a man who had already counted his winnings. Beside him sat Vanessa Gentry, dressed in funeral black, projecting an image of reluctant sorrow that barely concealed her triumphant smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's not prolong this painful necessity," Preston said, his voice smooth and practiced. He tapped a stack of documents in front of him. "The evidence of Ethan's mental decline is irrefutable. The security breach, the erratic behavior, the association with questionable characters. It is our fiduciary duty to protect the shareholders." The chairman of the board, a grey-haired man named Mr. Henderson, who had known Ethan's father, sighed heavily. "It is a tragedy, Preston, but the numbers don't lie. The stock is bleeding out." "Exactly," Preston nodded solemnly. "I call the motion to order. The immediate removal of Ethan Caldwell as CEO for gross negligence and incapacity. All in favour?" The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Slowly, hesitantly, hands began to rise. 1, 2, 3, 4. Vanessa watched the hands go up, her eyes gleaming. 5, 6. "Motion car," Preston began. Boom. The double oak doors at the far end of the room didn't just open. They were thrown back with enough force to shudder against the magnetic stops. The sound cracked through the tension like a gunshot. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Ethan Caldwell stood in the doorway. He looked nothing like the broken man who had fled his office days ago. He was flanked by Arthur Penhaligon and 2 large, stone-faced security officers. but it was the woman standing at his right hand who drew the room's collective breath. Melanie Linley was wearing the sharp white power suit Arthur had procured, tailored to perfection. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face set in determination. She didn't look like a waitress. She didn't look like a questionable character. She looked like a force of nature. "I object," Ethan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that vibrated through the mahogany table. Preston stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his face before he masked it with indignation. "You have no standing here, Ethan. You are suspended pending this vote. Security, remove them." The security guard stationed inside the room looked from Preston to Ethan, then to the men standing behind Ethan. They didn't move. They knew who signed the paychecks. "The vote is in progress," Vanessa shrilled, her composure cracking. "Get him out of here." "Actually," Melanie spoke up. Her voice was clear, steady, and cut through Vanessa's screeching like a razor. She stepped forward, entering the room ahead of Ethan. The board members turned their gaze to her, surprised by her audacity. Melanie walked toward the table. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hands were steady. She remembered her mother's words. "They bleed the same as us." "We aren't here to interrupt the vote," Melanie said, her eyes locking on the chairman. "We are here to provide the context you've been denied." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick blue folder. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it onto the polished wood. It slid down the length of the table, spinning perfectly to a stop right in front of Mr. Henderson. "What is this?" Henderson asked, looking at the folder as if it were a bomb. "That," Ethan said, stepping up beside Melanie, presenting a united front that seemed impenetrable, "is the digital forensic report. It proves that the Aura 2.0 leak didn't come from a negligent breach. It was a deliberate manual transfer authorized by a spoofed MAC address." "Technobabble," Preston sneered, though beads of sweat were starting to form on his upper lip. "He's trying to confuse you with jargon to cover his incompetence. And he brought the waitress? The very woman who hacked him? This is a farce." "The only farce here, Preston, is your career," Melanie said coldly. She turned to Arthur. "Play it." Arthur Penhaligon stepped forward, holding a small remote. He pointed it at the room's integrated AV system. "We bugged Vanessa's car 3 days ago. Just a hunch. But it paid off." He pressed the button. Static filled the room for a second, followed by the crystal-clear audio of Preston's voice. It was unmistakable. "Once the stock tanks, I'll buy the controlling share for pennies. We frame the girl, Ethan has a breakdown, and we own Aura OS by Friday. The board is a bunch of sheep. They'll follow whoever holds the feedback." The recording continued, Vanessa's voice, laughing cruelly. "God, did you see his face when he fired her? It was almost too easy. He's so emotionally stunted he actually believed the help would betray him." Click. Arthur stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Mr. Henderson's face had gone a dangerous shade of purple. He slowly looked up from the blue folder, his eyes shifting from the evidence to the man sitting at the head of the table. "A bunch of sheep?" Henderson whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Preston sank back into his chair, his face draining of all color. "Mr. Henderson, that is clearly a deep fake. Artificial intelligence can mimic voices now. You know that. Ethan is manufacturing evidence." "It matches the timestamp of the insider trading alerts we just received from the SEC," Ethan said calmly. "They are already in the lobby, Preston. Waiting for you." Vanessa stood up so abruptly, her chair toppled over. "No!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Melanie. "This is her fault. She's a nobody, a gutter rat. You can't believe her over us." Mr. Henderson stood up. He didn't look at Preston or Vanessa. He looked at the security guards. "Mr. Banks and Miss Gentry are to be detained until federal authorities arrive," Henderson ordered, his voice like iron. "Immediately." "You can't do this!" Vanessa shrieked as a guard gripped her arm. She thrashed, her elegance dissolving into feral desperation. "My father owns this city. I will ruin you all." Preston didn't scream. He simply slumped, the fight leaving him as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He stared at the table, refusing to meet Ethan's eyes. As they were dragged toward the door, Vanessa twisted her head back, locking eyes with Melanie. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You're nothing," she screamed, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "You're a nobody." Melanie watched her go, her expression calm, bordering on pity. She stood tall in her white suit, the woman who had survived the fire. "I'm the nobody who just beat you," Melanie said softly. The doors closed, cutting off Vanessa's screams. The tension in the room broke. The board members began murmuring, shifting in their seats, looking ashamed. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and walked around the table, extending a hand to Ethan. "Ethan," Henderson said, his tone apologetic. It seems we have made a grave error in judgment. The motion is dismissed, obviously. We will need to discuss reinstatement and damage control immediately." Ethan looked at the outstretched hand. He shook it briefly, professionally, but his eyes were distant. "You can discuss it with my legal team," Ethan said, dismissing the most powerful men in the industry with a wave of his hand. "Right now, I have something more important to do." He turned away from the chairman, away from the company he had spent his life building, and faced Melanie. The room went quiet again, watching the billionaire look at the former waitress as if she were the only source of light in the universe. "We did it," Melanie whispered, a tremulous smile finally breaking through her resolve. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her legs feeling weak. "No," Ethan said intensely, taking a step closer. "You did it. You walked back into the line of fire for a man who didn't deserve it. You saved my legacy." "Well," Melanie shrugged, trying to keep it light to stop the tears threatening to spill. "I couldn't let them win. I hate rude customers." Ethan laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened relief. Then his expression grew serious, tender. He reached into his pocket. "Melanie," he said. Melanie's breath hitched. "Ethan, we're in a board meeting." "I don't care," Ethan said. "Let them watch." He got down on one knee, right there on the plush boardroom carpet, amidst the scattered papers and the stunned executives. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mr. Henderson's jaw dropped. Ethan opened a small, worn velvet box. Inside sat a ring that made the previous prop engagement ring look like costume jewelry. This was an emerald-cut diamond, vintage and glowing, an heirloom from his grandmother. "Melanie Linley," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "A few weeks ago, I offered you a business contract for 1 year. I want to cancel it." Melanie pressed a hand to her mouth. "You do?" "Yes," Ethan said, looking up at her with raw vulnerability. "I want to offer a new contract, a lifetime term. No exit clauses, no performance reviews. Just you and me, building a life, fighting the world, and eating pancakes at 2 a.m. I love you, Melanie. Not the image of you, the real you." He took a breath. "Will you marry me? For real?" Melanie looked down at him. She looked at the ring, then at his face. She thought about the diner, the smell of grease, the lonely nights in Queens, and the incredible, terrifying journey that had led her here. She saw her future in his eyes, and it didn't look scary anymore. "Yes," Melanie said, the tears finally spilling over. "Yes, you idiot. Yes." Ethan stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, oblivious to the board members who, despite their stiff suits and corporate decorum, broke into spontaneous applause. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell didn't care about the stock price. He was the richest man in the world, simply because she was holding his hand. Wow, what a roller coaster. From a waitress ignored by the world to the CEO of her own destiny, Melanie proved that the truth is the most powerful weapon you can carry. Ethan learned that trust isn't about a prenup. It's about finding the person who stands by you when the world falls apart. If you enjoyed this story of karma, romance, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done in Melanie's shoes? Would you have told Ethan about the cheating or kept your job? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.